Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to share with you how we got our toddler to go from co-sleeping, so sleeping in bed with my husband and I in our room, to falling asleep on his own, in his own bed, in his own room. If you guys have been here for a while, you know that my 2.5-year-old toddler has been a terrible sleeper since day one, since he was an infant. So co-sleeping was pretty much the only option for us, and now finally, like magic, he is falling asleep on his own, in his own room, in his own bed, and it has completely been so life-changing. So life-changing. So I'm here to share with you my best tips, our experience, step-by-step, how we transitioned him out of our room into his own bed with minimal tears, and I will chat a little bit about that more in the tip section of this video. So I know this video is going to be kind of long. I'm going to break it down. I'm going to leave some timestamps in the description box below. I'm going to start by giving you guys an overall sort of back history of my son Hugo's sleep history. Then I will talk about some of the tips, step by step, how we got him from our room to his own room, and then I will answer some of your questions that you guys sent me specifically about sleep transitioning on my Instagram. If you're brand new here, my name is Erica. Like I mentioned, I have a 2.5-year-old son named Hugo, and I'm currently 28 weeks pregnant with baby boy number 2, and that was a huge reason why we finally decided that Hugo had to learn how to fall asleep on his own, in his own bed, in his own room, because we have another newborn coming and we knew that things were going to get chaotic pretty quickly. So before I jump into the video, I actually want to give you a tour of our son's room, show you the layout that we currently have going, share with you some of the tips and tricks we have going on in his room that I think create a really nice sleeping environment. Okay, so here is my toddler's room. This bunk bed is a brand new addition. We haven't even had it for a week, but it has been a pretty big game changer, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. These are the guardrails that we use. We have been using these for over a year. We got these while my son was co-sleeping. When my son became a little more mobile, when he started being able to flip over and crawl, we got these guards to be as safe as possible. These are the Regalo guards. I got them off Amazon. I will link them down below. They are so fantastic. We, for the longest time, were using 2, especially when we transitioned Hugo in here. His mattress was on the floor, so we had one on either side. But now that we have Hugo in a big boy bed against the wall, we only need 1. So what you may notice about Hugo's current setup is that it's pretty stark. There isn't a whole lot going on in terms of toys and books. He definitely has toys and books here in the closet. We don't have any curtains or shades currently on the closet, nor doors, but that's definitely something that I want to put up, because I think something that really helps when it comes to getting your toddler ready to fall asleep on their own, in their own room, is making the room centered around sleep, centered around being restful. Because if you have too many distractions, if you have too many toys, too many books all around, I don't think it's super conducive to creating as optimal a sleep environment as possible. We also, Hugo has a humidifier, and this is something that we put on every single night. Only thing that he uses during the night. We don't use a sound machine for him, and we unplug the air purifier while he's sleeping. Then in terms of little lights, our wipes warmer has a little light, so I make sure that during the night I just cover that up with a little washcloth, again, to make the room as dark as possible. We are planning on putting up blackout curtains. We are just waiting on the rod to come, so I think that'll also help with just keeping the room really dark and really cool. All of these things are pretty straightforward, especially if you did any sort of sleep training or sleep research when you had an infant, but for us it wasn't something that we started implementing until a little bit later on, and I wish we would have done it sooner. Okay, so now that you've seen my toddler's room, let's backtrack and I'll just give you a brief history on his sleep. His sleep has always been really difficult. I get questions a lot about how we started co-sleeping, why we started co-sleeping, and the reason we started co-sleeping / bed sharing was because my toddler wouldn't sleep any other way. So we didn't really have much of a choice. To be honest, my husband and I both were pretty on board with having our son in a bassinet and in a crib. I didn't even really know about bed sharing or co-sleeping until that was the only option that we had. My son would only fall asleep on my chest, and it was that way for 4 months. You can imagine the sleep deprivation. That was the only way he would fall asleep. I know that sleep is intertwined a lot with how your infant/newborn is eating, and are they breastfeeding, are they formula feeding? We breastfed exclusively in the beginning. But I'm here to tell you that we tried, if you're in the same position, you're not alone, we tried everything and anything to get him to sleep for more than 60 to 90 minutes in a stretch, because in the beginning, that's all he slept. So we introduced formula, we introduced, when it was appropriate, purees. We tried everything. We even consulted with a sleep consultant, and we tried sleep training. Nothing worked. I have a lot of videos all about our journey through all of that, and I will link any pertinent videos down in the description box below. Hugo was one of those types of newborns that I couldn't even put down when he was younger. So when he'd fall asleep on me, I couldn't even transfer him down in between my husband and I, because he would automatically wake up. It wasn't until Hugo was around, I want to say 7-8 months old, that I started being able to, when he'd fall asleep, I'd be able to put him down and he wouldn't wake up, which was revolutionary and life-changing for us. That was around the time that we stopped breastfeeding, and that was around the time that I started introducing the Merlin's Magic Sleep Suit, which is a cute little sleep suit. It looks like a snowsuit. I will link it down below. That worked really well for us for a period of time. So because we transitioned him then to being exclusively formula fed, we changed our nighttime routine a little bit. I'd give him a bottle, I'd lay him down, I'd sit next to him until he fell asleep, and then he would spend the night in between Jeff and I, and when he'd wake up, I'd give him some milk. So it was definitely not ideal, but better than the newborn stage. Then when Hugo was around, I want to say, was it 1 year old, we moved into this place. So up until that point, we've been living with my parents, me, Jeff, and Hugo all sleeping in one bed in the same room. Hugo was around 1 year old. We moved into this current place that we live in now, and Hugo got his own bedroom. And it was a few months after that that we decided that Hugo, we would try to get him to sleep in his own room. I think he was around 15 months old. And the first few nights went off without a hitch. We laid him down in his bed. I'd sat next to him until he fell asleep, which was pretty much exactly the same thing that we had been doing at that point in our bedroom. And we didn't really have many issues of him like waking up in the middle of the night. He'd wake up, he's always woken up super early, you guys know. He wakes up at like 4:45 until recently, and I'll tell you why. But wasn't an issue. And then we went on vacation, we came back, my cat had peed all over Hugo's mattress. That was around 18 months. We had to move him back into our bedroom, and then around right before he turned 2, we decided to move him back into his room. So there were these like stop and start periods of like transition him, 2 steps back, 1 step forward, 2 steps back. Like, you know, that sort of like, oh, like what are we doing? And we put a twin mattress on the floor with, like I mentioned, the guards on either side. And from when he turned 2 until very recently, about a month ago, husband or I would put Hugo down for bed after reading him a bedtime story. We do have a very strict nighttime routine, and I'll talk about that more in my tips. He'd lay down, we'd sit at the end of the bed, he'd fall asleep, we'd tiptoe out of the room and hope that we didn't wake him up in the process. And he recently, maybe like 2 months ago, started waking up once in the middle of the night. We'd walk him back to his room, and then he'd wake up super early. Then about a month ago, we made the glorious decision to finally get him to fall asleep on his own. And the biggest question that I've received from you guys is how did you do it? So let me talk you through how it happened, what I did, and then I'll talk about my tips. So it was a day like any other day. It was a nap time, and Jeff was out running errands, and I was home with Hugo, and I went to put him down for a nap. And around that time, so this is about maybe 3 weeks ago, Hugo had decided that bedtime was a game. And like I mentioned before, Hugo's 2.5 years old now, so he understands what bedtime is, but he also understands now that he can manipulate situations and make situations how he wants them to be. And so he had decided that when mommy was putting him down for bed, this didn't happen with my husband, when mommy was putting him down for bed, it was gonna be a game. So every time I put him down for about like 2-3 weeks, he would try to get out of bed, and remember, his mattress was on the floor with guards, so it's not as if he couldn't, right? So he'd stand up on the bed and try to jump over the guards, and he'd pick up his blankie and he'd throw it at me, and he just thought it was so funny. And like I said, I'm pregnant, and I didn't think it was funny, and it was becoming very hard for me to pick him up and get him to put him back and physically put him back in the bed. It was just getting to be too much, especially like getting up and off the floor, up and off the floor. So that day, we had been struggling for about an hour. I'd been trying to get him to go to sleep. I just reached the end of my rope, and I was like, you know what? That's it. Hugo, you're going to bed. You're gonna fall asleep on your own. So I stood up. I brought him over, because he at that point was out of bed. I brought him over to his bed, had him lie down, and I said, Hugo, you're gonna go to sleep now. Mommy's leaving the room. And I left the room, and I stood on the outside of his door. And here's the part that might be a little bit controversial, and I've had a lot of questions about how do I avoid tears. I feel like my toddler's gonna cry a lot, and there will be tears. There will be tears. There were tears, but they were only tears, like a lot of tears, that one time. This one time he didn't understand, like, why did mommy just leave the room? Up until this point, mommy had always been there. Mommy had always been down, like waiting for me to go to sleep, and it was a game, and now she's not here. So I stood outside his door. I would hold the hand, like he was trying to get out, knocking on the door. I held the handle. I said, Hugo, please go back to your bed. It's nap time. He wouldn't. I would open the door. I would lead him back to his bed. I would lay him down, and then I would go tell him, like, it's bedtime, leave the room, shut the door, and we'd repeat that process about 1,000,000 times. It felt like 1,000,000 times. There were a few times where I'd laid him down and I said, Hugo, it's nap time now. It's time for sleeping. It's time for you to rest. You are in your room. This is your room. It's such a beautiful room. You are so brave. It's time for you to rest. And then I would leave the room. And that first time, we repeated that for about 45 minutes to an hour, and it made me crazy. It really made me crazy. But I knew at that point that he had manipulated the situation, or turned the situation, I feel like manipulated is a strong word, but Hugo had turned the situation into a game. And so there was no way we could continue doing what we were doing, because I was only getting more pregnant, and Hugo had decided that mommy bedtime was a game, and it wasn't, like, there was just no getting out of that. So just repeated that over and over again. He'd come to the door. For the first time that he'd try to open the door, I would hold the handle and I said, Hugo, please go lay down. It's time for a nap. And then he would usually either go back to his bed and like play for a little bit and then come back to the door, or he would knock on the door, and then I would open the door and I would say, Hugo, it's time for a nap. And I would take him by the hand and I would bring him back to his bed, lay him down, tell him that it was time for a rest, and then I would leave the room. That was over and over and over again. Then, like magic, that night and every night since, I have laid him down, kissed him, told him it's bedtime, told him it's time for rest now, and then left the room, closed the door, and he has been fine. There have been times where he's tried to, like, he's wanted to leave the room, but he's gone up to the door, he's touched the door handle, and then he's gone back to his bed. The times that he has opened the door, like wanted to leave, I'll come to the room and I'll say, Hugo, it's time for bed. Like, let's go back to bed, lay down. Okay, time for sleeping, and then I'll leave the room. And that's it. My biggest tip, because that sounds pretty straightforward, right? My biggest tip, and the reason why I think that worked and continues to work, is because my son understands what nap time and what bedtime is. Up until this point, and the reason that I think sleep training for us failed, and the reason that our conversations with the sleep consultant never went anywhere, is because my son wasn't developmentally ready. So that's my biggest advice, and I know that that's not like the magic that everyone is hoping for, and not the magic solution that some people might be looking for, but that's my biggest advice as someone who's not a medical professional. Is I feel like Hugo just developmentally understood and understands what nap time means and what bedtime means. So I would say, before you put yourself through all the stress of sleep training, because it is very stressful, make sure that your toddler understands what nap time and what bedtime actually mean. What does it mean? What does bedtime mean? Bedtime means I'm going to go lay down in my bed, I'm going to fall asleep, and then I'm gonna wake up and it's the next day. My son has a speech delay, so he can't communicate to me that he understands what bedtime is verbally. However, I know that physically he knows what bedtime is. When I say it's bedtime, when we say it's nap time or bedtime, he will go to his bed now. So he understands, okay, I know what bedtime is. Bedtime is the time when I go on my bed with my blankie, we follow the strict routine, and then I close my eyes. And I think that that has been, for us, the secret key to it all, and like the biggest aha moment for us. I don't think this would have worked before, I just don't think this would have worked before me telling him, okay, it's bedtime, lay down, close your eyes, it's time for sleeping, and then me leaving the room, because he would have just been like, what? Like, why did you just go? I don't understand, right? So that for us, that's my biggest tip. That's my biggest tip before you put yourself through the stress of it all. Even when your child knows it's bedtime, there are still going to be some tears. However, if you want minimal tears and stress, then make sure your child understands what nap time and bedtime is. Now, they might understand what nap time and bedtime is and still be able to sort of manipulate the situation. They may understand, okay, I know what bedtime is, but I still want mommy to be here. I still want daddy to be here. So I'm gonna get up a million times to that door, and I'm gonna open that door a million times. I'm gonna get up in the middle of the night a million times. And that's when I think you've gotta take out your iron will card, and it's all about patience. And it's just going to be about repetition. That's huge, especially with toddlers. You've got to just walk them back to their bed. Guys, I don't have a lot of patience. I really don't. And that's something I need to work on as a human being. But that's my biggest advice, is for that child who understands what bedtime is and yet is still getting up a million times, they're just testing boundaries, right? So for us, we haven't really experienced that with Hugo. However, what I would do in that case is just walk him back to his bed, lay him down, tell him it's bedtime, and then go back to my bed. Now, when Hugo gets up in the middle of the night on those, random times, Jeff or I will walk him back to his bed and lay down with him. It depends what time it is. If it's like 4:30 in the morning, we'll usually just fall asleep in his bed with him, and then he's usually up by like 5:30 or 6. But if it's like midnight or 1, we'll walk him back to his bed. He'll fall right back to sleep, and then we'll come back to our bed. Another huge tip is to remain flexible, right? Because any sort of sleep training or anything that has to do with toddler development is on a bit of a rolling scale. It's so important to remember that these are little tiny human beings, and that they're growing, and that they're changing, and that they're just trying to make sense of their surroundings. So really just trying to cultivate as much patience and compassion as possible during this process, I think, is absolutely key. Another tip, and something that I've mentioned a lot, is routine. Routine. We have a very strict routine when it comes to Hugo's feeding times and his sleeping times. Hugo will take a nap 5 hours after he's woken up in the morning. And I know for certain kids that might be too long of a stretch, that might be too short of a stretch. But I recommend just finding that optimal time for you when your toddler is ready for a nap. And then when it's nap time, 5 hours after he's woken up, he will go into his room. I'll put him down for a nap. I will shut the lights, close the blinds, turn on the humidifier, give him his blankie, give him a kiss, tell him it's time for a nap, and then I'll leave the room. Our bedtime routine is just as strict, if not probably a little bit stricter. And we start cooking dinner at 4:45. Hugo will eat dinner at 5:30. Bath time at 6 p.m. He'll usually finish his bath like 10 to 15 minutes after 6. And then we will get him dressed in his pajamas. I'll brush his hair, brush his teeth. We will read a book or do like a very quiet activity like a puzzle. And then we will pick one book. We'll go to his bed, we will lay down, my husband will say goodnight. Again, we'll shut the blinds, we'll turn on the humidifier, I'll cover any sort of lights that are on in his room, like that little light on his wipes warmer. We'll lay down, I'll read a story to him, and then I'll kiss him goodnight, and I'll tell him how much I love him and anything else really sweet I want to say. And then I will leave the room, tell him that it's bedtime, and close the door. And that is our very strict bedtime routine. But I think that having a routine like that really sets your child up, because then they understand, okay, this is the lead up to bedtime. This is the lead up to what I know is me laying in bed, and then eventually falling asleep. So let's jump now into some of the questions that you guys sent me on Instagram about sleep, some of which I have already addressed in this video. The first one is, do you know what age or stage it's recommended to go to a toddler bed instead of a crib? I don't. We never used a crib, so I would consult your pediatrician on that. Next question is, did either you or Jeff have a hard time detaching from bed sharing? I would say I had a harder time detaching from bed sharing, especially because we had a period of time where Hugo was in our bed and then in his own bed and then back in our bed. And I think it's important to honor that detaching from bed sharing, moving your toddler into their own room, into their own bed, is a very big milestone, especially if you've been bed sharing since your child was born. So I think it's really important to honor that, and I don't know if there's ever going to be a moment where you're like, yes, today I am 100% ready. Like, there's always going to be part of you that feels a little bit sad about it and a little bit heartbroken, but I think assess your own situation, talk to your partner about it, which I know can be tricky, especially if one partner wants the baby in the bed and the other one doesn't, but sort of weighing the pros and cons and seeing where your baby is developmentally. I know Hugo could have stayed in our bed forever. I was definitely ready to get Hugo out of our bed. He's always been a really big boy, so Hugo started taking up a lot of space, and then I knew that I wanted to get pregnant and that it would be more ideal for our situation if Hugo wasn't in our bed while I was pregnant. So that's how it sort of worked for us. You have to kind of find that, I don't know, find that compromise. It's definitely a hard situation and important for you to honor how you're feeling because it is a transition and it's sad. Next question, do you let him self-soothe or rock to sleep then leave? So what we are currently doing is Hugo is very much so awake after I'm done reading to him, and then I'll leave the room. So I guess you would call it self-soothing. He puts himself to sleep is essentially what happens. And how old was Hugo when you gave him a pillow to sleep with? Now this is a really good question. Hugo has, I guess, been technically sleeping with a pillow since he was born, which I know is not the recommended safety guidelines for how newborns and babies are supposed to sleep. Our situation has always just been a little loosey-goosey and all over the place, and that's probably why I was so sleep deprived for so long. But there have always been pillows in our bed, and so transitioning him to a pillow would just always seemed very natural because we just, I mean, when he was sleeping on his own, like when he'd fall asleep on his own when he was like 8 months old and I'd be sitting next to him, he was using a pillow. Now, was he like actually using a pillow? No, he was just sort of laying on his back with his head on the pillow. He's always sort of been up on an incline. But when we transitioned him into his own room, I did include like 2 pillows. So I guess that was around 15 months old, and then again at like close to 2. Definitely consult with your pediatrician for like an expert opinion on that and when they think you should introduce a pillow, because I know that that's not the standard for when you're supposed to introduce a pillow. Next question, do you have to sit in his room when he falls asleep? If not, how did you do it? So I've sort of addressed this, and that's sort of been the main topic of this video. We did for the longest time until about 3 weeks ago, and now I don't, and it's been life-changing and wonderful. The next question, what made you and your husband decide to co-sleep? Like I mentioned in the beginning, we didn't have an option. That was the only option we had. When you would bed share, what was the process to get him to fall asleep? So when he was an infant, he would breastfeed to sleep, and then I would just hold him. There was a period of time where he would breastfeed to sleep, and then I would like try to set him down. It usually didn't work. Then when he started just formula feeding, I'd give him a bottle, and then I would lay him down. He'd be pretty drowsy, and then I would just sit next to him until he fell asleep, and he would just, I guess then he would be self-soothing and kind of figuring out how to fall asleep on his own. Next question, did he cry a lot in those first few days in his bed? How did you handle it? So like I said, that nap time, that very first time that I decided that this was happening, he cried a lot, but it was just his reaction to something changing, to like the routine changing, because after that he was pretty much fine. For the first week he was a little pouty, like when I would say goodnight to him and kiss him, he would have like this little pout on his face, and you could just tell that he was a little bit annoyed that I wasn't staying in the room with him, but it wasn't like this huge tears. It wasn't a battle to get him to fall asleep. And how did I handle it? I was at the end of my rope at that day, and so I just I just knew that this was going to be the best thing for Hugo. I knew this was going to be really great for Jeff and I, and absolutely essential for bringing a newborn into the house. Just kept that in mind, and to be honest, Hugo has been falling asleep so much quicker on his own, and he's been sleeping for longer. He wakes up now at 6 a.m. He used to wake up at 4:50 or 5 a.m. every single day, no matter what. No matter what, we'd keep him up late, it didn't matter. Now he wakes up at 6 a.m. and I think a huge part of that is the new mattress and the new bed we have for him, like creating that, like a very, I don't know, like a very optimal sleep environment. But it's been incredible. All right, guys, and that's the process of how we got my son from co-sleeping with us in our room to falling asleep in his own room, in his own bed. Keep in mind, every toddler and every situation is different, but I would say creating an optimal sleeping environment, following a routine and a schedule, all really helped, and then keeping an eye on your child's development, and then diving into sleep training when you feel like your child is ready and when they fully understand what bedtime and nap time are, I believe will make the entire process so much easier, a lot less tears, and a lot less stress. If you have any questions, definitely leave them down in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye, guys.